I have to say welcome to everyone here. This is Bridges Live, and I'm Dr. Paul. And we have a show every Wednesday called You Be the Judge. Me and myself, Dr. Paul, and Marylin, Pierre, attorney at law, is the host. But we have a group of family that's coming on and joining us, and I just so love the company. So thank you everyone for joining us on You Be the Judge. Marylin, kick us off about what we're going to be talking about here because it is important because we talked a little bit about it last week about the judge issue and what's coming up. So please kick us off.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad to have so many people here. Thank you very much and welcome. I last week we talked about this bill that is coming up, well, these bills that are coming up in this year's legislative session in Maryland, and why these bills are important and why it is that we need to pay attention to them and oppose them. I am so happy to have Claudia Barber here because she knows this issue inside and out, and she is going to educate us today. So Claudia, if you could introduce yourself. Oh, but before you start, Claudia, uh, Dr. Dyer, can you mute CPW? Because you're the host, so you could mute someone. I don't think that, okay, good, thank you. Because then we don't have the noise that was coming from there.
Okay, go ahead.
Claudia?
Well, I say good evening to everyone, and I'm happy to be a part of your program, Attorney Pierre. I applaud all of your efforts to challenge the system and to pretty much illuminate people's insight into what is all part of the judicial process. My name is Claudia Barber, and I am a 2016 and 2018 judicial candidate for judge on the Circuit Court for Anne Arundel County. And I embarked upon my my efforts to serve on the judiciary on the Circuit Court in January 2016. And I was there, and I welcome Reverend Ricky Nelson Jones. I'm glad you're here too. He was also one of the 2016 judicial candidates. But I filed a certificate of candidacy in January 2016. And going forward, there was quite a bit of turmoil, frustration, dirty tactics. So much happened during that time period. And what I have been keeping my eye on is continuous legislation that has been introduced year after year after year after year to eliminate contested judicial elections. So the scenario in Anne Arundel County has been something that has been similar, but I just wanted to share that piece to start us off.
Okay. For those who don't already know, I know we discussed it. I was also a candidate in 2018 and 2020 for Circuit Court Judge in Montgomery County, so a different county. And I see that Reverend Jones has joined us, and you could talk about your candidacy as well. But I just want to make sure that we who don't know, those who don't know the issue as well, know that we have a constitutional right to run in a contested race for the circuit court in the state of Maryland. That's what it says in the Constitution now, right?
Correct.
Okay.
It's an open process.
It's an open process.
Exactly. So the bills that are being introduced to change to amend the Constitution, so that way challengers can no longer challenge the appointed judges. Okay. So
exactly.
Reverend Jones, do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about what we're discussing tonight?
Before Reverend Jones, thank you very much. But those of you who are not talking, please mute your mic, except for Marylin, please. And but everyone, please mute your mic. And then before you talk, just unmute your mic because I'm getting some background noises for a lot of feedback here in the studio. So just mute your mic. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Reverend Jones.
Yes. Good evening. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share. Reverend Ricky Nelson Joseph, I'm a civil rights attorney in Baltimore City, second vice president of the NAACP fan of the county, and I'm a pastor of a church, a Baptist church in Columbia, Maryland. I ran for 3 consecutive years, 15, 16, 17, and I believe 18. Within those 4 years, I ran 4 times. One of the things that I believe is important to understand is that of the people who did run that I knew, all of these people were eminently qualified, especially African Americans that I knew. And objectively speaking, in terms of qualifications, the Caucasians who were recommended to the governor and put on the bench were very limited in terms of legal knowledge, experience, and scholarship in comparison to the African Americans like myself, Judge Barber. When you're practicing in 15 different areas for 30 years, you can't put a Caucasian on a bench who's been in practice for 10 or 15 years in 2 areas and say that they're more qualified. That's preposterous. So we're not talking here about merit. We're talking here about systemic racism. And it's important to understand that, because I challenged this all the way to the United States Supreme Court and they would not grant my writ. That means the judiciary has no stomach to make the system more equitable and just. Therefore, we have to go the route of the law. Legislatively, we must try and change this. I'm from the state of Louisiana, and down there they were doing the same thing to a bunch of African American judges that I knew. And what they actually ended up doing, because they could not get the judiciary to be more equitable, they have no stomach for it because they're the beneficiaries of this system. So they actually had to, so to speak, go to the legislature and carve out a section whereby the majority of the people there would elect their judges. So they carved out a section of predominantly African Americans, and that's how they got on the bench. So at this point here, we're talking legislative change. I've been communicating with senators and House of Delegate members about proposing a bill, and I will give them the content of the bill. They could do the format, but a bill requiring the Judicial Nominating Commission to recommend at least non-Caucasians commensurate with their population in that particular county. For example, in Anne Arundel County, where I live, almost a third of the county is non-Caucasian. So there's no way in the world they should be recommending all Caucasians to the governor. And so these are the type of things we have to really seriously consider now. We are dealing with systemic racism. This is it by definition. And that's what's before us.
So let me ask you this, Ricky, and this is a quick question. And I think people have the same question often on when they're not paying attention. And this is the key thing. When people are not paying attention, they have the same question. So what?
Well, let me tell you the reason why.
Let me tell you the reason. Don't you get that question sometimes? I mean, don't you feel like that's what's not being answered by the people who are not watching? And they say, well, so what?
Right. Well, all you got to do is look at the imbalance in sentencing. Look at the police officers who have gotten out for outrageously criminal behavior. To a large extent, we don't seem to make the connection between who the judge is and what's going on in society. Most of the ills that we're dealing with, these decisions coming from the courts, this is because these are folk who are just disconnected from normal everyday people and what we all know is fundamental fairness and justice. So who's on the bench, to a large extent, will determine a lot of what's going on in society. And so that's the reason why you don't respond. So what? It could be your son. It could be your daughter.
But the issue is, the problem, the issue is that the majority of people that getting arrested or going to jail are Black.
Right.
Okay. But
hi, this is TPW. If I could just weigh in and add on with Pastor Ricky Nelson Jonas saying, here in Anne Arundel County, unfortunately, we've had even teenagers and things going on in the school system, and children being victims of racism. And when these things get to the courts and they're heard by an all-white judiciary, it certainly has an effect on what happens, whether or not the person's found guilty or not guilty, and even in sentencing. So it goes beyond, sort of what you're saying. It really does affect all of us, whether you're being pulled over and you're going to court on a traffic ticket, whether your child has been the victim of a noosing or a threat. It's all relevant.
And thank you. And I agree with what you're saying, but I think sometimes we got to talk to the people that are very thick into understanding. And it is not often that simple for them to understand if if it doesn't affect them, or it rarely affects anyone they ever know. And those are the people who are voting more often than not. Am I right?
Well,
Well,
that's true. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we discuss right off is that the statistics and the research that we know of
Mm-hmm.
says that Black people are not more likely to commit crimes than white people. I
Right.
mean, we've had oh gosh, Michelle Alexander with the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration, and the new age of colorblindness. We have loads and loads of research that says that. So the fact that from the very beginning of the system to the end of the system, you see that people of color are so grossly overrepresented
Mm-hmm.
in the criminal justice system is also an issue. And today we're limiting the discussion to the criminal justice system because we only have a limited amount of time if we want to discuss the other portions in terms of divorces and, you know, in civil cases and how people of color are affected. We could save that for another day, but today is just the criminal justice system. Because I hear sometimes like, oh, so what if, you know, Black people are overrepresented? They're the ones who are out there committing the crimes. So I just want to make sure that we address that issue right off.
And I completely agree with you. I remember when I was younger, there was that study done about drug dealing going up and down 95 from Maryland to New York. And it found that it wasn't that young Black men were doing most of the drug dealing and sending the drugs up and down 95. It's just that they were the ones that were being pulled over. So thank you for that.
You know,
Well,
Claudia.
I'd like to add,
Claudia, you add something real quick, but I'm going to put this in your bee in your bonnet. Do you think there's literally corruption in the judicial system? But go ahead.
well, I can't speak statistically to corruption, but what I can speak to is things that happen in the judiciary that are not good. For example, just as you may have seen, many of you have seen, I hope all of you have seen the movie Just Mercy,
Yes,
which
ma'am.
is based on the book written by Brian Stevenson,
Yes,
which
ma'am.
I'm a strong advocate. I think he should be on the United States Supreme Court, by the way. But to get back to that point, there were episodes in that book where miscarriages of justice in allowing the courtroom to be filled with all white people, and then the Blacks that arrived earlier were excluded from the courtroom. And then when you confront this issue with the judge just pretends that he's going to guarantee you equal justice under the law. And to me, that was a sad scenario, but I have experienced a similar scenario in the court system where my clients were behind the scenes given a short end of the stick in an ex parte conversation that started before I got on the line. And so things like that happen, but they are sad and they're unfortunate, and they do relate to a fair administration of justice. And to the extent that it happens and it's not rectified. Now, if I were the judge, I would have ordered everybody out of that courtroom and allowed the people to come into the courtroom in the order in which they arrived at the courtroom, so that you don't have this sheriff taking control and not caring about relevant litigants that or community members attending a courthouse session and being excluded. There's no exclusion there. And to the extent that you have, yes, judges on the system that will tolerate something like that is in my opinion is just really abominable.
So, some of you are ran for office, and I know my little sister here, Marylin, also ran to be a judge. Do you think that this is because of money in elections when it comes to judges? Is there a way we can separate that completely? I mean, I personally don't believe in money in elections, but is it because of money that creates this corruption, or at least favoritism?
Oh, now if you're speaking about the money in elections piece, money is relative. And, I've often heard the argument at many committee hearings before Senate Judicial Proceedings and House Judiciary Committee. Well, there's a lot of money in politics. And I will say, though, that when I won the primary election in 2016, I did not spend more than $2,000 in my campaign. Okay. And my opponent's 4 sitting judges outspent me like 8-1, 10-1. And then as he advanced more into the general election, I mean, they were going for it,
Mhm.
and to the extent that you need all that money to run a successful campaign, not always the case.
No.
People that are underfunded sometimes win elections. And so that's kind of a red herring type of approach to or explanation or argument. As a distraction, but it's not really a credible argument when it comes to why you should eliminate contested judicial elections.
Please, Ricky, you have your hand up.
Yes. I personally spent almost $20,000 of my own money when I ran the 3 times that I ran. And what I want to emphasize is that sometimes we forget that when you start talking about corruption, you start talking about ethics, and you start talking about morals, that is an individual thing. For example, you could put Reverend Jones in any environment and I would never be unethical. So a lot of times they're trying to use things that really are not applicable here. It's about the way you carry yourself and the type of person you are, not the environment that you're in. So I've heard that argument as well, and it is completely without merit.
Well, the reason why I ask, because we hope that when people run for an office, specifically when it comes to the law, that they would mostly act on an ethical response. And that is not always the case. So what causes someone to move away from that responsibility or that oath?
Can I ask, and that's a very good question, Dr. Dyer, but I think we're veering away from what we wanted to talk about tonight.
Go ahead.
Because one of the things that we wanted to talk about was to distinguish between what is the law now and what is the proposed law. So for instance, I want to talk about the commission.
Yes.
And how these judges get appointed. Because when somebody challenges them, they say, well, all this challenger did was pay $50 and they're on the ballot. And here I am, I went through this long, arduous process and I was found to be super duper qualified. And this challenger is just a sore loser. So can we talk about that and why it is not a good idea to continue that process where there would only be that system of appointment and not contested elections after the appointment?
Yeah, break down that process for us.
Well, I just like to add to that it is an open process, meaning that the Constitution defines the qualifications for a judge, not a judicial nominating commission, but a constitution. The Maryland Constitution defines the qualifications, and it also defines your eligibility to get on the ballot. So it's not just an automatic put on Mickey Mouse on the ballot and there they are. You have to, number one, you have to have practiced law for a number of years, and you have to be at a specific age. You have to have passed the Maryland bar and be in good standing. And you have to also be an individual. The Constitution also speaks of an individual of integrity. Now, where I disagree strongly with the judicial nominating commissions is that there is, just because somebody provides you with a 20-page application doesn't mean that their process is great, because that's just numbering pages of an application. The question is, what are you doing to conduct a fair, objective analysis of each applicant? Just because you appear before 20 bar associations and you have no idea what top questions they're going to ask you. The question is this a fair, objective analysis of each applicant? Are, you asking people, vetting these people for their beliefs. I mean, for all you know, you could have oath keepers and Proud Boys on your bench. You
Right.
could have people that are members of the Klan on your bench, and you know, so there is no executive order that requires you to ask specific questions of the candidates. It is a very loose process, and to the extent that you don't have a vetting process to weed out bad apples to that degree, the process is flawed. And if your process is such that you are practicing exclusion statistically, then you have an imperfect process, which is why it should remain open. Now, the other thing, I don't want to take up all the talking time, but the other important thing is that these pieces of legislation that have been presented by Senator Kramer, Delegate Dumas, and Delegate Cardin in the House, they are designed as a voter suppression tactic. You have to see it and call it for what it is. You have
That's
to
all it
call
is.
it out, because you are no longer keeping the process an open process. You're closing it. Every voter should know that. You're closing it. You no longer have the liberty to choose your own judges you want. You know, that you closing the process such that the commission tells you these are the people that you vote yes or no for. And that's what the retention election process is about. And that's what these bills are about, to make the retention process the law of the land, and to eliminate contested judicial elections, which would close the open process.
I know Mr. Scott has a question about how can we make this transparency, if someone can ever answer that. But Ricky, go ahead.
Well, can I piggyback on Scott's question? Because I was going to say that the commission that I went in front of had commission members who had relations with certain candidates. And so, those candidates, their names went forward. The people that they quote, they did not know, because of course, there's some people that there's some circles that they choose to be in, but the people that they claimed that they did not know, they did not recommend. And so to go with Scott's question about how do we add transparency to that? Because people are believing that, oh, the commission is recommending the best candidate, so therefore we should vote for whoever the commission recommended.
But that's what the paper says. Executive order suggests that people, that's how you get to the best qualified. But these people that I've seen shortlisted are not the best qualified. They're just not. It's a popularity contest. That's really what it boils down to. I like you, and you've had this connection with the Bar Association or with this person on the Judicial Nominating Commission, and you have enough votes to carry the day. I mean, they make up their minds before you even are interviewed by the Judicial Nominating Commissions. And it's not a fair process. It's not an objective process. They're not using a grading rubric. They're not, objectively asking each applicant the same questions. There's a lot of inconsistencies in that nomination commission process.
Ricky?
Yes, let me just kind of address directly what the problem is with changing this from an electoral process to an appointment process.
Okay.
The main problem is that, number one, it's going to be anti-democratic. As soon as you take the people out of the process, then it's kind of unfair, because the circuit court has a significant and major hand in the lives of people. The circuit court deals with major civil and criminal matters, family law, juvenile. It handles appeals from the district court, the orphans court, the administrative agencies, just about everything you can imagine: divorce, child custody, child support, just about everything you could think of. The circuit court has its hand in people's lives.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about putting a judge on that type of bench, how are you going to even reasonably consider removing the citizenry from having a say-so in that? So it's terribly anti-democratic. Number two, it is also not a meritorious process. I can tell you, I've been before the nominating commission probably about 5 or 6 times. And let me tell you the questions I was being asked. Would you rather be a pastor or a judge? What in the world
What does it have to do with anything?
Law?
Right.
For years in 15 different areas, writing articles, legal articles that have been published nationwide at least 7 times, and also served as a CLE panelist, a continuing legal education panelist, at least 8 times. What does it have to do about legal knowledge, experience, and scholarship? It is not a meritorious process because they're trying to justify these poorly qualified Caucasians and put them on the bench. If they ever look at merit, none of them could be in the same room with Reverend Jones in terms of objective knowledge, legal knowledge, experience, and scholarship. So it's not meritorious. And it's something else. When you remove it from being an electoral process and make an appointment, you are basically codifying the racial exclusion that is presently on the bench.
Correct.
In Anne Arundel County, for almost 400 years, they've excluded non-Caucasians at 99.97%. That is absolutely preposterous. And nobody can excuse that. Nobody can argue in favor of that. And I'll debate anybody today who think they can defend this. So those are the 3 major reasons, sir.
I know we have another raised hand, and Mitchum, go ahead. You have a question for the panel. I hope I pronounced it right. Mitchum, you have raised your hand, sir. All right.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can
I'm
hear
sorry.
you. Go ahead.
I was sitting on a mute. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak. First of all, thank you for having this for the people of state of Maryland, and especially in Montgomery County. This is very important, that where people of color and should have a voice, where their judges get elected in any kind of election. My personal experience, I'm not an attorney, but I have seen, I filed a lawsuit against 3 judges, and the judges in the federal court, where I seen possible corruption in circuit court judges, where there had been monetary transactions between the defense attorney and the judge, 2 judges, and also the expert communication happened. But unfortunately, the judicial immunity came into place and the cases were dismissed. Even I didn't get even a trial, which is very unfortunate.
Marylin, thank you, Mitchum, for your question. And someone will get to answer that. Marylin, I'm asking this question as a labor person. What can we do as people, if not just to be aware who and what do we need to do? I mean, that's really, what do we need to do? Not what should be done, what could be done. We need to do something, and that's the call to action.
Well, first of all, we need to arm ourselves with information, because
that's why we're here.
Yeah, there's so much information out there that is just not true. For instance, they talk about how, the people who are applying to run as challengers are not qualified, and that they only pay $50. That is not true. Like Judge Barber said, the people who are running as challengers have to meet the same qualifications to be on the bench as the people who are already appointed. Therefore, you have to get the consent of the administrative office of the courts, as well as the consent of the Maryland State Board of Elections. You cannot get on the ballot unless you meet the requirements to become a judge. And yes, you have to pay $50, but so do they. Everybody has to pay $50. What is important to note is that there are no rules or regulations as to who gets to be on the commission and who recommends people on the commission. One of the people that I ran against, his law partner was on the governor's commission when he went before the governor's commission. And we could go into details as to how these people are connected and why it is that they're pushing the people that they know and the people that are connected to them.
And we can go, that's how completely wrong can that possibly be when you have it's your law firm's partner? I mean,
yeah.
And
we
there's
have
no oversight.
Molly, I saw Molly's hand first, sorry.
Yeah,
and then after that, I saw
Molly.
Molly's hand, sorry. Oh, and then I saw Arlene's hand. Sorry, go ahead, Molly, you unmute.
What I wanted to say is, how about doing a study of how many non-white candidates have been nominated in the state of Maryland, do it by county, and what proportion of the state is non-white, And there's a new law in Montgomery County that I don't think has taken effect yet, but everything has to be equitable racially and ethnically. And I think it takes effect later this year. It was started by Nancy Navarro, who's my county council rep. And it's passed. It just hasn't, I don't think it's taken effect. But just presenting the evidence should be enough to show that it's racist.
Well, you raise an excellent point, and believe it or not, I have gone to my delegate that's in my district and asked to establish a task force and allow them to do exactly what you said, and that is, have them evaluate these counties and how they are practicing exclusion and looking at the racial content of the courts versus the racial content of the area, so that they can present these results to the legislature and they can see. So there are ways we should be asking our one of the call to action should be to go to your legislature and demand that a task force. First of all, we should be demanding oversight on those judicial nominating commissions because there's very little, if any. And two, we should also be requiring them to present a task force to study this whole racial makeup of the courts and determine whether it is really, exactly as you said, racially equitable.
Arlene, go ahead. You raise your hand, please. You're on mute, Arlene. She's still on mute.
Arlene, you're muted.
Muted.
Press on the space bar.
Got it. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm very new to this.
Well, at least it's not a cat. At least your face is not a kitten.
I have 5 dogs. If you want to see them, I could bring one of them. But I'm very new to this process. I've just frankly I got annoyed in the last couple of years. So I've started looking and I've joined the Up-County Advisory Board. So I've had a little tiny bit of political stuff. My thoughts are, none of us know who the candidates are. I met Marylin this year and at the Democratic Club, and she's the first person I've ever met who is running for a judicial place. And I brought her to a group that I belong to, and everyone told me they were so impressed and they voted for her. They have never even voted for any judicial nominee. I think one of the issues is nobody knows anybody. And it's very difficult. You either see a name you don't know. I think, and maybe I'm 100% wrong because I tend to be religiously blind and colorblind. I like people. And I have a strong feeling that a lot of people don't vote because they have no idea who these candidates are.
Ricky?
Pardon me?
Ricky he's got a comment. Thank you. Thank you, Arlene.
Thank you.
If somebody mentioned something about getting statistics, let me tell you what I actually did before I filed a lawsuit against the state of Maryland, went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. I had a Freedom of Information Act request served on the administrative office of the courts, and they provided me the statistics. And the statistics showed that for like the last 10 years at the time, there had not been one African American who had been recommended to the governor to put on the bench. So in terms of statistics, we have the statistics. In terms of the figures, we have the figures. In terms of the facts, we have the facts. This is not something that requires a study. The exclusion of non-Caucasians, at least in Anne Arundel County, and if you exclude Baltimore City and PG County, it's pretty much exclusion around the state. So we're not thinking about study here. We know what's going on, systemic racism. So what can we do about it? Because I've already traveled the legal route, we got to really focus on the legislative route now to get our delegates and our senators to realize the importance of having an equitable judicial system. Since people come to court for justice, they should not walk into the face of systemic racism. So we got to try to get a bill push our delegates, push our senators to say, listen, we need a bill in place to make sure that when somebody's recommended to the governor, it at least is representative of the people that the court serves, and is not this taxation without representation,
Right.
where the court is almost all white,
Right.
and almost a half county is non-white.
Before I get to Mr. Siegel, I have a question for you. And this is for all of you, Alan, especially attorneys here. Do you think this is done purposefully? I mean, we see the outcome. We recognize what is happening. We see the results of it. Is this a purposeful action on the others?
Yes, I can easily say yes to that.
It just has to be. So if things are done purposefully, right, then they have actually tried to cover their tracks and to navigate the way around for not being impugned.
Well, it's even more deep. I can take it a step further and argue that not only is it purposeful, but the way the laws are written, there are no penalties, there are no consequences for them doing exactly what they're doing. So when they practice exclusion, they get by with it, because the only way to challenge the system is to, mount this severe lawsuit. And then you have to have, again, the right judge that's fair-minded to evaluate it and call it for what it is. But yes, this is very purposeful. It is very intentional. It is a white superiority tactic. It is, something that that needs to be nullified to the extent that people should have equal access to the law. And this seriously impacts, for example, if you have police misconduct cases, why would you put that case? That's why you have all these disparity in sentencing that's becoming so obvious with this January 6th insurrection, and how the judges are treating, there were no immediate arrests. That's the first obvious, inequitable situation. But then when you see all these people being released on low bond, and then the type of charges that the prosecution is going forward with, they're minor, they're mild. They have probably 100 laws that these people have violated and felonies that they have committed. And not one single person has been charged with a capital police officer's murder. Not one that I've heard of.
Yep. And Mr. Siegel, hold on, Ricky. Mr. Siegel.
I don't know how to raise my hand, but this is TPW, and I'd like to recognize when you have a chance, please.
Yes. Mr. Siegel?
Tabor, Mike Tabor. Sorry, it's my wife's computer. I did want to just say, a lot of it is electoral unawareness. The general electorate doesn't pay attention to local elections. Much more important to a lot of people what's going on in Georgia. I mean, I've talked to friends who go down to organize, and I ask them, well, who's running here in Montgomery County to circuit court judge? And they're clueless, and they don't think it's important. Ironically enough, Scott's still on there, our group formed when Jamie Raskin first started to run and had no support, not support from the Democratic Party or any support, and ran against a very popular candidate. And it was a grassroots effort that got him elected. And you could see what he's doing right now. We're all very proud of him. But I mean, the other, you more or less said it. I mean, this is a racist state with a long history of racism. And, those of you who are people of color, my heart goes out. I want to be supportive. I'm a strong supporter of Marylin, but a lot of it is, a lot of us are privileged. And, you have to admit to that. And the question is, how do you increase voter awareness? Marylin's done that. She's consistently ran. And I assume, Claudia, you were doing something similar. Is that consistency? But the racism is unavoidable, especially in Maryland. And I go back to Congress of Racial Equality in the 60s and going out and demonstrating wherever I could as a student. But this is a racist state. and there's no denying it. It's an uphill struggle, and you just have to be consistent, and you have to have backing, and you've got to struggle not only against the Republican Party, but sometimes the Democratic Party.
I know a lot of people have questions, and we'll get to them, but go ahead, Mr. Ricky. You're going to say something.
Yes, what I was going to say is even more significant than being intentional, this is historical and arguably plain. These bills that are being pushed presently to eliminate contested elections, that is a planned thing, because if they are aware, they know the racial exclusion that presently exists. So if you eliminate contested elections, you so to speak codify that. So it's more than just intentional; it's historical and arguably planned.
Thank you. And Marylin, I know you want to say something. What was that, Marylin?
Actually, what I wanted to say was that Holly was supposed to go after Molly, and we've gone so many, and she's had her hand raised for so long. So, Holly?
And sorry, go ahead. And then I know TP, you want to talk next, but go ahead, Miss Holly. I apologize.
Okay, I just think you have to be careful, and I'm going to bring what Marylin said in another, and it was Thomas Johnson on another call, that it's very tough, because if you say there's racism, I mean, in the slate that Marylin ran against, I mean, it should have been an embarrassment. It was 3 old white men. The only thing you could say is they were all incumbents seeking another term. So, you know, it's not like they were chosen then. It went back 18 years or so. So I just want to point that out, that it's really tough to say that, to really make it a substantial case that it's racism in her. I mean, do you disagree with me, Marylin? I mean, and the point is, they do throw in some Black women, but I've just asked everyone in Montgomery County if they can say the number of Black male circuit court judges, and no one gets the answer right, because if they say anything but 0, they're wrong, you know? So, but in that one case, and I believe, this is what I believe, that it's a function that we have 18-year terms. There's so little turnover, and most places have much shorter terms.
Yeah, it's a 15-year term. And I want to, well, actually, at this point, we have to decide, do we want to continue talking about what we're talking about and then have a meeting next week to finish the discussion, since the hearing will be on January 24th, or do we want to address the bill themselves?
Well, may I be heard, please?
Are we establishing a platform this week, and then next week we'll discuss the bills themselves? Otherwise, we have to get into the bills.
I just have a really quick comment. This is TPW.
Go ahead,
You know,
TP.
thank you, sir. Perhaps I am naive. I completely agree that the racism is historical. I grew up in this county. Believe me, I could tell you 1,000 stories. We don't have time for it tonight. But I would like to think that it's not intentional. Please don't kill me. I love everyone that's on tonight. Please don't kill me. I absolutely think that it's historical. I don't want to think that is intentional. I do think it has something to do with the lack of information, maybe some ignorance. I think it's maybe some good old boys thing, you know, who you see at the yacht club, and, you know, who you went to high school with. You know, Chris Rock has this skit, and I know I'm going to get it all mixed up, but, you know, there's this woman that wants to, a minority woman that wants to join this sorority, and she can't get in. And, you know, the women are like, oh, no, you know, we're not racist. It's not that we don't like you because we're Black. It's just that we don't know you, and you're not a member of the yacht club or something like that. So,
well, you know, TP, I can hear your heart crying, and that's okay. But what you're missing is that it is intentional. And even in the reference you use, it's not because you're something, it's because you don't believe. Even no matter what the intention is or why it's used, it's still intentional. It may not be because you're Black. Well, I'll use your analogy, because you don't belong to the yacht club. It's still intentional. So wherever reason someone or whomever can use to exclude you purposefully, That's intentional.
I hear you. I heard also comments made by other folks saying that, oh, it's because we don't know you. And I presume, because I've also applied and been rejected. And I presume it's we don't know you because you're not a member of this club or that club, or we don't come to your house to play pool, or, we don't meet at the marina.
Go ahead, Miss Molly, go ahead.
I'd like to be really practical. I'd like to have a meeting next week, and in between now and then, try to get the information we already have about the number of Black candidates who have applied in the state of Maryland, and the number who have actually been nominated, and what proportion of that is, how does that compare with the proportion of the population? I think 20% of Maryland is Black. And we don't have any Black male judges nominated to begin with, as Thomas Johnson has told us. They haven't been nominated since Hogan got in. So start with facts. And secondly, start thinking about what we're going to say when we testify for these bills, because we don't have much time. We should get talking points together so we say the right things.
Yeah, I don't think anybody actually knows what those numbers are, because it's such a closed process that for us to go and look at all 25 different jurisdictions, I don't know.
Well, we
Judge
know,
Barber, Reverend
we know
Jones,
that-
do you think that there's a way to get that information?
Yeah, it's going to have to be a Freedom of Information Act request.
Yeah, but we won't get that by next week.
Next week.
Well,
Why
don't we just have a representative from each
request
county
in.
provide the information? Because I sure do know that information from my county.
They won't.
No, I don't need it.
Put the
I have
request
it.
in.
I know
Put the
it.
request in.
But we should ask for it all now, as soon as we can, and get it, even if we don't get it in time for this hearing, start getting it and use it later, whenever, as soon as we get it.
Absolutely.
Mr. Allen, hold on, Ricky. Mr. Allen, please.
I'd like to make a few comments about this and the bill. I think that there's not enough time to get the statistical information that we need that will pass muster. But the low-hanging fruit is that everybody on this call should weigh in on these bills and say that it's anti-democratic, that it's an example of voter suppression, and it's really inconceivable that somebody would would propose this legislation. This is not the way that our democratic process is moving forward. This is 500 steps backwards. And so we really should be calling out the people who are supporting this. I think one of the ways that we can make a splash about this, besides condemning those legislations and its sponsors, and I don't even believe that, with the exception of Kathleen Dumais, I don't believe that any of the other sponsors really have a dog in this fight, that they've been put up to it by some other people. I think that we could make some useful, the talking points that somebody referenced just recently, we could make some useful points about what the process should look like going forward. And that would include some of the things that were mentioned earlier in the call. I've got a list over here. Let me just go through them and throw them out so they can percolate in your minds over the next couple of days, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So we need, these are the reforms that I think are needed. We need to post the results from the bar interviews. I mean, that would be useful information. We need public financing for judicial elections because everybody is not on an equal playing field. We need more disclosure of campaign contributions. We need to prohibit sitting judges organizations, which have really hurt independent candidates who are challenging nominees from the governor. I think there should be a public website on judicial evaluations. So when people say they don't know the judge, they could go to a website and they could look up a judge in any county and they could see how that judge is evaluated. We have been talking about in another forum about recommending that we change the terms for circuit court judges. Right now, Montgomery County, it's 15 years. What happened if it was changed to 12 years and then you had a retention election after 6 years? that would give an opportunity for these judges to present themselves to candidates. When we get to sort of the corruption aspect, and maybe that's too strong, but there should be prohibitions on circuit court judges in particular counties from getting contributions from the people who practiced before them. We should also suggest that there be prohibitions on foreclosure trustees, who are also partners of sitting judges, so they can't be rewarding their friends. Looking over here, that to get the legislature, because somebody said, there's no penalties, there's no sanctions, there's no evaluations. Maybe we should recommend an annual or biannual evaluation of all the judges in a public forum where somebody's going to have that conversation. Substantial, how do we change the system? You have more funding for public defenders. A lot more money so people don't have to represent themselves. This is my shopping list. And
you got a long shopping list, and this ain't
I got
Whole
one more,
Foods.
and then one more point, which I've been pushing. I was a candidate for clerk of the Circuit Court of Montgomery County in 2014 and 2018. So I've thought about this for a while. And one of the things that I would like to see considered is that we have cameras in the courtroom. So that gives an opportunity for the public to know more about the judicial system, and then more about how these judges relate to people who come before them. So I think that everybody who can should send in testimony, sign up to do oral testimony, come down hard on these crazy bills, and then suggest a way forward so they have something to talk about. These bills should not exit the other side of the legislative process at all. And as Marylin pointed out in the very beginning, and maybe Miss Barbara, this is a constitutional thing, and there should be a much more serious process about taking away constitutional right.
Miss Claudia, I'm going to ask you this question here is, there's many first steps, but we need to take one. And seeing the issues, what's our first step?
Well, the first step is really to have more oversight and to also keep it an open process. So we have to continue to pursue the legislature to continue the open process, but also there's got to be greater oversight of commissions.
And the way to recommend that is through legislative, right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea that I had about having a task force, the end result will be they present recommendations to the legislature, just like you had the Kerwin Commission blueprint, just like you had the police reform legislation, that was presented to a task force or task group to present recommendations to the legislative body. These are the improvements you need if you're going to have an equitable judiciary, because at the end of the day, these judges are also, there's a huge element here which Mr. Bowser mentioned is how they weigh credibility of evidence, and how they treat witnesses. Do they discredit Black witnesses? Do you have judges discrediting Black witnesses or not believing their story? As opposed, because it boils down to credibility and weighing evidence and how they're weighing that evidence.
It still, to me, it just shines so much of a hard-hitting light on the legislative knows that they're doing this and know what they're not doing, right? Okay, so let's just go with they know exactly what they're not doing purposefully. And it's not to really answer the question, why? Is it ask the question, how can we stop their why? Because they're doing it. How do we stop it? Especially when we got to go through the wolf who's guarding the hen house. So now we're back to a question is, how do we do that?
Well, the other part to that is that we still have to be vigilant
Yes.
And
Well, that's without question. I get it.
the problem is that you still have these legislators that are repeatedly bringing the same legislation over and over and over and over and over. And then we got to go back to the state house or to the House Judiciary Committee, the Senate Judicial Proceedings Commission, and testify again and again and again, raising the same points, same points. The only time you get traction, because they had a lot of co-sponsors of the similar legislation last year. The co-sponsors dropped off this year. It could be because this is an election. It's coming up on an election year.
It is.
It also could be because there was a lot of activity where lawyers ran in contested judicial elections in this last election cycle, and they won. They unseated these incumbent judges. So they know that these contested judicial elections are here to stay. They have unseated these choices, and especially in the circuit court for Prince George's County, there were a number of 2 people lost their seats. And in Howard County, an incumbent judge lost to Quincy Coleman, an African-American judge, male on the Howard County Circuit Court. Akiba Gibbs won a seat on the circuit court for Charles County, and she unseated a white male sitting judge. So you have these inroads that are being made. And for that reason, a lot of the legislators were not co-sponsoring the same legislation. They're soloing it out, but they're still doing it. And they're still, trying to make a strong lobbying effort to get other legislators to say yes at the committee level so this can pass to the floor. So, and I found myself by myself testifying against Senate Bill 295 all by myself.
Well, don't do that no more. You won't do that no more. I'll tell you that. Before we take off, Mr. Ricky, please.
Yes, you asked what must be done. Of course, we have to defeat these bills. But the second thing is we got to influence our legislators to support a bill to make the Judicial Nominating Commission not recommend anybody to the governor, and the governor not to put anybody on the bench unless it's representative of the population that the court serves.
We have very little time left. We'll have this show next week. And those of you who have my email in the chat box, for those of you who also know what You Be the Judge, you know how to reach out to us. You can inbox me at drpaulwdyer@gmail.com, or you can inbox in all the social medias you can. And so you have a comment, and so we can talk about this next week. Marylin, before we take off, please, what do you think?
Well, I think we should get some of our community leaders involved as well. I see that Carl Snowden is in here. He is very instrumental in Anne Arundel County being so well represented on this issue. I don't know, Carl, if you're listening, if you could say a few words. And then we also have Darius Stanton here, who is the executive director of the Legislative Black Caucus Foundation. And I don't know if Darius wants to say something as well. So I think we need to have the community leaders involved in this issue as well. It is a very, very heavy lift. And the more people who understand the issue, the more people who can realize what will happen if these bills are passed, the more helpful it will be.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining You Be the Judge. Marylin and I so immensely joined everyone for coming on, because this is an important issue. I think all issues are important, but this is like a little bit of a peak here, and because things fall underneath it a lot. So we'll be here next week. We're going to lay down some of these bills next week. We're going to talk about more of this next week. If you want to join us, please email me so you can get the link, or Marylin. And we would love to have you on. And those leaders that Miss Marylin talked about, please, we would like for you to open your mouth and say something. And if you're doing more work, just email so we know what you're doing, because it is important that we all know, because that's the transparency we're looking for. Yes, Ricky, anyone had a quick question before we take off?
I just have 2 sentences, if I can.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So I think what you guys are doing, all of you, it's very, very commendable. Thank you very much. Sir, if possible, if we have all the information like Ms. Marylin has, with the possible corruptions, things like that, if you can go on the social media or news and focus them so that people are aware what's happening, because a lot of people doesn't know that there are so much of biased against people of color in the judge's mind that a lot of people doesn't know. If you can able to do that as a campaign, as a base of campaign, and we can let people know aware of this, so that this kind of bill people will think twice or 10 times to bring it forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
Dr. Dyer, if you want to reach me about men, in our case, what success we've had in talking with each other, Marylin knows how to reach me. She can give you my telephone number.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Everyone have a blessed evening. Stay safe, stay healthy. Great conversation. I love it, love it, love it. I just know we need to do more than talk. I'm a big proponent on action. So with the information you do have, if you need more, reach out to someone, get more tools for your toolbox, but you got to use your tools. You just can't keep it in your toolbox and expect something to be built. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Everyone have a blessed evening.
Dr. Dyer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good evening. This is Darius A. Stanton. Peace and love.
Hey,
I
Darius,
wanted to,
did Marylin call
yes,
you
sir.
out?
She very much did. I wanted to just only get on to say that I'm not in charge of the foundation. I'm only a member. I'm vice president, but not the president of the foundation. That is Jules Dunham Howe. But no, I just wanted to say, first and foremost, this is a critically important issue. I am very grateful that you all have raised this to a platform. We are not only in a position where our communities have been continuously placed into the prison pipeline, but people don't understand the trauma that impacts our families when folks are incarcerated, mistreated in this particular venue, and how it impacts our families for generations, the economical impact, the health impact, the spiritual impact. And so what we're doing is very important work. And those people who are on the bench, as well as those who are brave enough to even run, that are African-American, are under continuous attack unless they fall in line with this system. I watched what, Judge Barber went through in her race, as well as the brother that ran with him. I watched what happened in this most recent election with Marylin, Pierre. And so the fact that we were able to get those seats, as Judge Barber mentioned, overturned and put some other people on those benches that look like us, our children are at stake, our families are at stake, our legacy is at stake. And so the solution that I would recommend is that the information about the hearings, I'm saying this in every space that I can go into, we make sure that we get that out to organizations that are willing to communicate and testify and write letters and make phone calls to those who they're not normally hearing from, because we have to bring those folks who may consider something as troubling as this legislation is to move forward. And they need to hear from those voices that are not being heard. And I've never seen as much in my 30 years in this space, as much energy from the grassroots community that would not normally be involved in the legislative process, that are looking for ways to be involved. So my recommendation is to make sure that we get that information to everyone here on the call about the hearings, who to write, who to test, who to really put the pressure on to make sure that this does not go from the Judiciary Committee. Thank you.
You have my email, you have Marylin's email, and the more we could talk about on our show, because we're here every Wednesday, You Be the Judge, at 6 p.m. So we're here to keep our voice out there and let people know what's going on in the legal system. This is why we started the show, is to give information, give understanding of what the information is. This way you can actually take the action. Thank you, everyone. Miss Claudia, we're going to have you on again. It was a blessing. And Mr. Ricky Jones, all you guys, Mr. Alan Bowser, all of you guys, we definitely want to have you on so we could talk legal minds about legal issues, because this is important. I love the conversation, but to get into the weeds of things, to pull it apart, we need your legal mind. So thank you so very much.
Have a good day.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.